Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anupama, Professor at Department of Economics, Punjabi University, Patiala. I am going to talk about module Population and Urbanization in Developing Societies from Population, Urbanization and Poverty. So students, we are going to discuss about various stages of urbanization through which the less developed as well as the developed countries have passed. What are their driving forces and what are their challenges? The main objectives of this module are to examine the growth of urban population in least developed as well as developed countries, to know about the stages of urbanization in the world, to know about the main driving forces of urbanization in any economy, to know about the challenges posed by urbanization, to understand about the need of changes in the institutional setup to meet these challenges of urbanization in developing countries. Growth of population, urbanization, and economic development are closely intertwined. While urbanization per se does not cause development, sustained economic development does not occur without urbanization. Urbanization not only leads to movement of people from villages to cities, but also from agriculture to non-agricultural occupations. This shift leads to more stable growth of the economy as compared to growth based on predominantly agrarian structures. The urban areas are also expected to have better facilities. Therefore, the quality of life in urban areas is considered to be better than that experienced in rural areas. But at the same time, unhindered growth of urban population also leads to congestion, pollution, scarcities, increase in housing prices, and growth of informal sector, which may be considered the downsides of urbanization, which may be accentuated under the system of inappropriate and inadequate institutions. Hence, in this module, we will discuss the trends and structure of urbanization experienced by the developing countries, the determinants of urbanization, and the need for changes in the existing institutional setup. In this respect, the first question is, what is urban? Defining an urban area has been a difficult task, and there is no commonly agreed definition among various countries. Each country defines the term urban in its own ways. They may define it in terms of administrative units, the size and density of population, or the proportion of labor force in non-agriculture sector. The countries which use the criteria of administrative boundaries categorize the urban centers as the places having a municipal committee or corporation, a town committee, or a cantonment board. In India, we have a definition containing all of the above features. In India, the urban areas are identified as the towns, that is the places with municipal corporation, municipal area committee, town committee, notified area committee, or cantonment board. Also, all places having 5,000 or more inhabitants, a density of not less than 1,000 persons per square mile or 400 per square kilometer, with pronounced urban characteristics, and where at least 3/4 of the adult male population is employed in pursuits other than agriculture. Pakistan and Sri Lanka follow the administrative definition, while the countries like Malaysia, Turkey, etc. define it on basis of population size. And the countries like Japan define it on basis of predominance of the non-agricultural occupations along with the population density. Thus, we can have three types of definitions. Firstly, the administrative definition, in which the place is classified as a city for administrative purposes. Secondly, the physical definition, which is based upon the density of buildings, people, etc. Thirdly, we have functional definition, which is related to the behavior of the households and firms, especially in terms of their occupation, to reveal the boundaries of what is urban territory. After defining what is urban, let us discuss about trends in urbanization. Today, more than 50% of the world population lives in the cities. The UN report on urbanization prospects has pointed out that in 2010, 5.16% of the total world population was living in urban areas, and this share is expected to increase to 67.2% by the year 2050. In 2010, 46% of population of the less developed regions was living in urban areas, and this has increased from 17.6% in 1950 and about 35% in 1990. Still, the share of urban population in the total population of less developed regions is much lower than that of the more developed region, which was about 78% in 2010. These trends can be easily observed from Figure 1. The figure clearly points out that although the share of urban population is lower in less developed regions vis-a-vis the developed regions, the gap between the two is gradually declining. Moreover, the world average is closer to the average share of urban population in the less developed countries, as a greater proportion of world population lives in the less developed regions. Further, the narrowing gap between the rate of urbanization of more developed regions and the less developed regions is due to the reason that the decline in average annual growth rate of urban population for the more developed regions is much greater than that of the less developed region. This can be observed from Figure 2. According to UN projections, the world urban population is expected to increase from 3.6 billion in 2011 to 6.3 billion in 2050. Virtually all of the expected growth in the world population will be concentrated in the urban areas of the less developed regions, whose population is projected to increase from 2.7 billion in 2011 to 5.1 billion in 2050. This figure shows that the average annual rate of change in urban population in the developed world declined from 2.3% per annum in early 50s to merely 0.67% per annum between 2010 and 2050. On the other hand, between 1950 and 1955, the less developed and the least developed world had respectively experienced 4.22% and 4.54% average rate of change in their urban populations, while during 2010 to 2015, the same has declined to 2.43% and 3.73% respectively. Thus, the proportion of urban population in most of the developed world is close to its ceiling, while the less developed and the least developed have hardly covered the half of the distance. Another interesting feature of the urbanization of the world population is that most of the urban population still lives in small-sized cities. The UN report shows that in 2011, over half of the world's 3.6 billion urban dwellers live in cities or towns with fewer than 500,000 inhabitants. Such small cities account for 55% of urban population in the more developed regions and for 50.2% in the less developed regions. In 2011, cities with fewer than 5 lakh inhabitants accounted for about half of the world urban population, amounting to 1.85 billion, about 365 million people, equivalent to 10.1% of world urban population, are living in the cities with 5 lakh and 1 million inhabitants. Taken together, 3 in every 5 people living in urban areas reside in cities smaller than 1 million inhabitants in 2011. However, this proportion is expected to decline in the future, and it is being projected that in 2025, only 1 person out of 2 will live in cities of this size. In contrast, cities of 1 million and more inhabitants, accounting for about 40% of the world urban population in 2011, are expected to account for 47% of world urban population by 2025. Thus, in future, more of the population would move to the big cities, especially the mega cities, a majority of which would belong to the developing countries only. In 1970, there were only 2 megacities in the world, that is Tokyo and New York. Since then, their number has increased markedly, and most new megacities have arisen in developing countries. The maximum growth rate has taken place in China, as most of the megacities today and in 2025 would belong to Asia. There is a clear trend of accelerated urban concentration in Asia in future. Megacities are experiencing very different rates of population change. The megacities in the developed region, for example in France, Japan and United States, are exhibiting the lowest rates of population growth, while the megacities of the developing region, that is Nigeria, Bangladesh and Pakistan, are experiencing a relatively higher growth rates of population. Another important feature that has been pointed out by the UN report is that the world urban population is highly concentrated in a few countries. In 2011, about 3/4 of 3.6 billion urban dwellers on Earth lived in 25 countries. China, India, and the United States accounted for 37% of world urban population. Most of the 25 countries with largest urban populations are highly urbanized, but 8 have levels of urbanization ranging from 28% to 51%, and they include some of the most populous countries in the world. These are Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Between 2011 and 2030, the urban areas of the world are expected to gain 1.4 billion people, including 276 million in China and 218 million in India, which account together for 37% of the total increase. A further urban increment of 1.3 billion people is expected globally during 2030 to 2050, with India being the major contributor, followed by Nigeria. Together, these two countries are expected to account for 31% of urban growth during 2030 to 2050. China will only contribute an additional 44 million during the same period. Yet, China will still have the largest urban population in 2050 with 1 billion people, followed by India with 0.9 billion people. On the downside, the trends of urbanization are also associated with degenerative peripheralization of the poor, where the people are driven out by high cost of living, which leads them to live in ad hoc settlements on the peripheries of the metropolitan areas. In these settlements, say slums, people have lost both the advantages of urban and rural life. Without planning, cities can grow absent-mindedly, spread over every available empty space, leading to the growth of slums. Where sanitation is non-existent, epidemic diseases can thrive, exploitation is rampant, and physical dangers lurk where law is absent. Boosting the opportunities while minimizing the dangers and difficulties are the main challenges of development in today's urban transitions. Over the past 10 years, the share of the urban population living in slums in the developing world has declined from 39% in 2000 to about 33% in 2010. The fact is that more than 200 million slum dwellers have gained access to improved water, sanitation, and durable housing shows that countries and municipal governments have made serious attempts to improve slum conditions, thereby enhancing the prospects of millions of people to escape poverty, disease, and illiteracy. However, in absolute terms, the number of slum dwellers in the developing world is actually growing and will continue to rise in the near future. In the developing world, the number of urban residents living in slum conditions is now estimated at some 828 million. With poor sanitation facilities, congestion, and air pollution, the health of the citizens are always at the stake. But it is also being felt that this problem is more associated with less developed countries, as the cities in these countries are less equipped with increasing pressure of urban population. Due to poor management of public facilities, the access to sanitation facilities in these countries is found to be lower than that of the developed countries. On the other hand, the environmental positions measured by particulate matter microgram per cubic meters are worse in developing countries than the developed ones. These trends can be observed in figure 4. This figure shows that as urbanization increases, the access to sanitation facilities increases. The particulate matter concentration decline, but in both the cases, the high-income countries are better placed vis-a-vis the low-income and medium-income countries. Thus, we have observed that the world has witnessed a rapid growth of its urban population, and the major drivers of this growth are the developing economies. Historically, urbanization has been driven by the concentration of investment and employment opportunities in urban areas. The cities are supposed to be the centers of major productive activities, services, and other amenities of life. By one estimate, 80% of world's gross domestic product is generated by urban areas. The cities are the source of new jobs, ideas, innovative and creative activities. In this perspective, it is important here to understand the determinants of urbanization. The businesses find it beneficial to relocate or expand themselves from rural to urban areas in order to reduce transportation cost, to take advantage of external economies of scale, and to draw from a large pool of skilled workers. On the other hand, the individuals move from rural areas to cities because of expanding economic opportunities, more and better services in terms of health, educational, transportation, entertainment, etc. the reasons of individuals and that of the businesses mutually reinforce each other. But everything is not so rosy as it appears. The developing countries face many challenges in absorbing the wave of human migration into the cities. Providing adequate housing for expanding population is a problem, and many of the newly arrived people have no other choice but to settle in slums. The gap in influx of the migrants from rural areas and creation of jobs lead to swelling size of informal sector in which the workers are barely able to survive. Moreover, uncontrolled urbanization leads to uneven development, pollution, and natural hazards. Actually, both the conditions and consequences of urbanization in the developing economies may be linked to development of capitalism, which is inherently an uneven process. This process goes through certain stages of urbanization, which can be easily associated with economic development. In this respect, several stages can be outlined. Early stages of economic development are characterized by rapid growth of urban share and centralization of population in urban cores. The intermediate stage witnesses slower urban share growth and spread of growth to intermediate sized cities and to suburban hinterlands. The mature stage also registers slower growth of urban share and even loss of urban populations from some cities and from cores. The post-industrial stages register stable but higher share of urban population with renewed growth of largest metropolitan cities in selected cores along with continued growth of many medium-sized cities. This stage is also characterized by the decline of older industrial cities and regions. In this framework, we can easily find an association of GDP and the rate of urbanization in a particular economy. This relationship can be easily witnessed from Figure 5. Historically, very few countries have reached income level of $10,000 per capita before reaching about 60% urbanization. We can see from this figure that initially the increase in urbanization rates have slower impact on GDP per capita, but as the economy crosses the mark of 60% of urbanization, a slight change in rate of urbanization leads to significant increases in GDP per capita of the countries. Since an increase in urban population is associated with rise in per capita income, naturally we can expect a fall in poverty. Figure 6 shows that as rate of urbanization increases, the poverty ratios show declining trends after an initial increase. The relation between urbanization and income across countries is striking. During the initial phases, when urbanization rates and per capita income increase at roughly the same rates, productivity increases reflect shifting resources from low productive rural activities to the urban ones. In later phases, rapid productivity gains reflect mainly improvements within industrial and services, leading to higher factor income and so reduction in poverty rates. Today's rapidly growing developing countries have followed a similar path. The next most important feature of urbanization is shift from agriculture to non-agriculture activities. The sectoral composition of GDP growth across countries confirms a strong link between rapid growth and a structural shift from agriculture to urban activities, like manufacturing and services. In rapidly growing economies, industry and services dramatically outpaced agriculture. Across the developing world, it has been observed that 86% of the growth in value added comes from services and manufacturing, which are mainly located in urban areas. Economies of scale offer both efficiency and consumption advantages to urban economies, manifested in several ways. Economies of scale in input markets affect a wide range of industries. Specialized services such as accounting, tax advice, and intellectual property management are easier to obtain in large cities. Moreover, the public services and other amenities are also easily available in the cities. Economies of scale in cities also reduce the transaction costs. High densities in cities allow both workers with differentiated skill and firms with specific needs to reduce their search costs. Location advantages can thus be even more valuable for the developing countries than their developed counterparts. As developing countries seek to compete in increasingly integrated world markets, even static advantages conferred by cities help firms to increase their competitiveness in the global market. Let us discuss urbanization and the institutional setup. Urbanization usually accompanies positive economic developments such as industrialization and entry into export markets. Sometimes it may also be associated with adversity in agriculture or social conflicts. Actually, people typically move to cities well before the institutions emerge to accommodate an orderly urbanization process. Urbanization, therefore, is nearly always attached with a number of problems such as unsightly, unsafe or unhealthy development, congestion, skyrocketing land prices, highly questionable real estate practices, growth of informal sector, etc. Thus, a number of institutional changes are required to mitigate the problems of urbanization. Therefore, here we examine some of the most important structural transitions that urbanization requires. The most important institutional change that urbanization requires is financing public goods. Cities require public goods to manage the high densities due to influx of population and business. Productive and healthy urbanization requires finance to support lumpy investments in infrastructure. As the developing economies generally have fewer resources, there is a historical tendency for urbanization to coincide with foreign borrowings. In the best of the circumstances, the help is sought from national governments. The devolution of resources from the central pool necessitates fiscal federalism. In theory, optimal land taxation could be used to finance local public goods, but doing so difficult in practice in developing countries. Cities in low-income countries have large informal economies that are difficult to tax. Due to these structural problems of the developing economies, a sound system of public finance for local public goods does not emerge naturally. Therefore, making this transition effectively deserves more attention in the development process and requires central government support in some form. The next important thing is regarding modernizing real estate and financial markets in urban areas. Rapid urbanization and economic growth, they require another significant transition in terms of modernization of real estate markets and systems for financing them. Due to rapid migration from rural to urban areas, there ought to be sharp increase in low-skill, low-wage, non-farm jobs that fuel growth in developing country cities. This leads to influxes of low-income city residents who need housing convenient to their work. The business offering jobs need land for shops and factories. Because of agglomeration economies, they all want to locate in the same places. This points towards a need of a functional real estate market. But in the developing economies, the capacity of the formal real estate market to respond is limited as it is inadequately developed. In most of the developing countries, the real estate market is much less responsive than it should be. It is characterized by lack of planning, adequate building standards, apart from poor legal framework of land ownership, registration, taxation, etc. This leads both to absence of incentives to invest in the real estate market and too high land prices for the low-income migrants. Therefore, the governments should intervene to provide basic infrastructure and reasonable security of tenure for the poorest and subsidize the public housing programs. It is also being felt that the government norms should be transparent and simple to follow. Otherwise, it may lead to corruption and thus making real estate development expensive and slow, weakening the supply response just when it needs to be stronger. As income increase, there would be spurts in demand for housing, but as for majority of the households in the developing countries, the investment in houses is once in lifetime. They tend to spend more than their current capacities. Therefore, housing demand is most likely to be associated with rise in demand for housing loans. Thus, the market loans by nationalized and private institutions should be adequately attached with this demand. It is also being felt that the government norms should be transparent and simple to follow. Otherwise, it may lead to corruption and thus making real estate development expensive and slow, weakening the supply response just when it needs to be stronger. As income increase, there would be spurts in demand for housing, but as for majority of the households in the developing countries, the investment in houses is once in lifetime. They tend to spend more than their current capacities. Therefore, housing demand is most likely to be associated with rise in demand for housing loans. Thus, the market loans by nationalized and private institutions should be adequately attached with this demand. One more important issue of urbanization is to deal with the environmental aspects. In most of the developing countries, a big majority of urban population live in informal settlements, which suffer from lack of infrastructure and services such as water supplies, sewerage, drainage, etc., leading to the major environmental issues such as air pollution, water pollution, and inadequate sanitation. Air pollution is common, particularly in developing country cities, due to the growing number of motor vehicles and increasing industrial activity during the process of urbanization. Poor maintenance of vehicles, poor fuel quality, and poor road conditions, they also contribute. Much of the solid waste generated in urban centers remains uncollected and is either deposited in surface water and empty lots or burned in streets, which pose a serious threat to public health. The poor waste disposal also leads to contamination of water and subsequently to intestinal diseases and other infections. The disposal and treatment of industrial toxic and hazardous waste also causes serious problems. Lastly, for most cities in the developing world, providing an adequate and safe supply of water for domestic and industrial uses is also a major problem. In spite of significant investments, the sewage system in many major cities still cannot support a high-density urban environment, with the result that sewage is often discharged directly to drains or waterways, or disposed of in individual septic tanks that are poorly maintained. With growing urbanization, these problems have further accentuated and pose a serious threat to the health of the urban residents. Although the governments in these economies are promoting decentralized and participatory development, yet these steps are severely constrained by lack of institutional capacity, limited resource mobilization at the local level. Therefore, there is a need to orient the existing institutional setup to these problems associated with growing urbanization in developing countries. Regarding this, Bertrand Renaud has raised some questions which need urgent policy attention. How to improve the economic base of the city and provide productive employment to a rapidly expanding labor force that often has low skill levels? How to provide affordable transport and control congestion on roads? How to develop land use patterns that generate a better balance between home and workplace? How to recapture some of the increments in land values generated by urban growth to finance city infrastructure investments? How to improve housing supply when private sector dominates and necessary infrastructure is not adequately supplied? How to mobilize financial resources to meet massive infrastructure needs of the cities for roads, water, sanitation, education, health services, safety, etc. To sum up, it can be stated that in the globalized world, the developing economies are rapidly being urbanized. The structure shifts in these economies have witnessed that the majority of urban population mainly reside in small cities, although the new megacities have also emerged in the developing countries. The problem of general masses in the megacities may differ from that of the small-sized cities, but each of them requires a coherent policy. The existing institutional setups in these economies are needed to be geared according to the changing needs of the rapidly urbanizing economies so that the benefits of growth may reach equally to the population residing at the lower rungs of the economic ladder. That's all with today's lecture. I hope you must have enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.